If you play the Slav, then here are 7 must-know traps. Some of these traps will be for white, some will be for black. You're watching the Chess Geek channel. We upload every other day, so make sure you subscribe, and let's jump straight in to the first trap, which really basically happens when black takes out their light square bishop very early on, because we know that the light square bishop in this sort of setup, where we have 2 pawns on the light squares and a third soon to come, is not a very strong bishop. So sometimes black tries to sneak out that bishop early on, but this comes with a huge downside. Namely, this pawn over here on b7 becomes immensely weak, and we can try to take advantage of that via tactics, like you'll see here. So one of the nice ideas here is g4. This pawn on g4 is now a menacing piece, and so one of the ideas for black might be to take this and get rid of this pawn, but now this walks straight into queen a4 check. If the queen blocks, there's bishop b5, and if the king moves, well, like I said, this weakness becomes very apparent in a variation like this, where we are very happy to win the rook and go on to win the game from here. So going back, this is the first trap. When the bishop comes out very early on, look for ways to get your queen involved on the queen side and go for quick attacks with the white side. Trap number 2, once again with the white side. In this position, white can also play knight c3, a very common idea, and often black decides to take this pawn and sometimes hold on to this pawn by means of b5. And, you know, this is a very common sort of tension of the Slav. This defines many Slav positions where white is going to try to put as much pressure on these pawns as they possibly can, and black is going to try to hold on to the extra pawn as much as they can. And it becomes a very interesting battle in the center of the board. And one of the tactical ideas that can happen is the fact that the b file is open up, combined with some development on the king side. You can find yourself with the white pieces in a very strong position. For example, rook b1 here, and already there is huge issues on this bishop, which is now undefended, and knight takes c4 is a nice idea indeed, where suddenly you can see the pin here comes into play. And in the actual game that this trap comes from, c5 was played, but now the knight hops back to d2. We have rook b8, bishop takes b5, and the game actually ended after the move d5, winning even more material. Trap number 3, this time it is black's trap, so let's switch sides. In this position, if white plays knight to c3, and this is a pretty common trap that can happen, in this position you can continue with the black side by playing knight f6, and if they go bishop to g5, one of the nice ideas that you can consider is knight to e4 here. And again, this can happen in various move orders, as you will soon see. I'll show another variation of this, where the point is that after takes and takes, in this position, this bishop is undefended, so the move e3 is a huge but common mistake, where now queen a5 will pick off this piece over here with a nice fork. Now, as I mentioned, I want to show a different variation of this. So if we go back in this position after the move c4, I want to show the move d takes c4, and you'll see a very similar point, where you can play bishop e6, a nice idea, because after knight to g5, that walks straight into the same concept. So another trap here, 2 traps very similar, relying on the same underlying point with this fork here. Now for trap number 5, I'm gonna stay with the black side here, because I know what you're thinking. Those 2 traps, they're very similar, and you're right. So let's look at a more unique trap that can occur in the stone wall defense. After e3, we have e6, and the knight comes to e4, and you'll see these pawns over here. This is a defining factor of many Slav positions, this stonewall structure, which really the point for black is to go for a quick attack, and you'll see that really happen here. We castle, we have rook to f6, the rook is swinging in, the knight is really strong, the bishop is usually going to drop back and be a huge, powerful piece from the back of the board, and you can see that all the pieces are at play for black. So what trap can occur from a position like this? We'll take a look. After rook to c1 here, one of the things that white sometimes tries to do, seeing that we're playing on the king side, they're going to try to open up the queen side and get play over here, but they have to be careful in how they do that, because here, this very natural looking sacrifice, knight takes d5, fails to a beautiful concept. After takes, the whole point was queen takes c8, but now check this out, bishop takes h2, unleashing the power of the rook and unleashing the power of the bishop from such a far distance. So something that definitely is easy to miss for white, and a nice trap, which means that black will be up an entire queen. For trap number 6, we're going to go back to the white side, and here I want to show and illustrate a very big trap that can happen if black gets too greedy. Sometimes the purpose of c6 is not only to defend the center, but black sometimes looks to take out their queen early and do some damage over here, but this is usually not such an effective plan in the Slav for black because the queen can be very vulnerable and susceptible to getting trapped, and as you're going to see here, that's exactly what happens. So in this position, you can continue with just e3, and if they go for the very aggressive queen a5, bishop d2, queen to b6, and here you can lock up the structure. You go c5, baiting them to take, and if they do so, well, suddenly bishop c3, and the queen is simply trapped on move 6. This is a really easy way that you might win some games, and again, it doesn't have to be this exact move order. You know, both players can throw in, for example, knight f3 and knight f6, for example, so you can play around with this in various different situations within the Slav. And in our final trap, ladies and gentlemen, this actually started with the Dutch, but as you'll soon see, it transposed into the stone wall variation of the Slav with this pawn structure over here and e6 soon to come. This is basically exactly the Slav. And we had the move g4, which is a really interesting variation. If as white, by the way, you're having some trouble fighting the stone wall, this is maybe something to consider. Maybe not in this exact move order, but you can certainly try to prepare it. It's an interesting thing to consider here, because the point is we're trying to break up the very solid structure and nature of these pawns in the center, and therefore once the kingside pawns are sort of broken up, there could be some quick attacks. And that was a hint because this is exactly what happens. Queen to c2, and already a beautiful sacrifice. Bishop b4 here, ladies and gentlemen. We have knight to e5, getting the knight more active, and after pawn takes on c4, rook takes on h7, with now using this weak g6 square because the pawn no longer guards it, so whatever takes, there's going to be issues over here, and therefore in the game, black decided to castle, but now rook takes g7, a double second sacrifice, and a gorgeous way to finish the game. Bishop h6 now threatening some mating ideas, hitting the rook. I mean, this is just impossible to defend, and in fact, just as a nice final touch, if rook to g8, then knight f7, checkmate. A beautiful way to kind of open up the position, g4, a nice thematic idea to put away. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video and it helped you understand more the tactical ideas that exist and flow within the Slav. Make sure you subscribe for more content just like this. Like this video if you learned something new from it, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.